Joe, welcome back to the podcast, man. It's been a couple years since we last did one of these.
What's up, Greg? Always good to see you.
Yeah, for sure. So today's topic is actually going to be about the downside of creative financing because you see a lot
Wait,
of stuff.
wait, there's a downside?
Apparently there is, because if you go online, you see that everything is, sunshine and rainbows with these deals, but you've had a different experience in the past.
Yeah, there's a downside to every strategy. What we're talking about here is just be aware of the downsides of subject twos. And even the guys that teach it, and I'm good friends with Pace, love him. He would say the same thing, and he does. He talks about it all the time. There's a lot of downsides, and not every subject two is a good deal. Just
Yeah.
like not every wholesale deal is a good deal, not every rehab is a good deal. You've got to think worst case scenario. All right. So if you take on this deal, what could happen? And you've got to know your numbers. You've got to have like your buy box criteria and do not deviate out of that buy box criteria. So yeah, I've done subject twos for a long time.
What was your experience? Like, I know that when the market shifted in the GFC, that's when a lot of people got in trouble because the values obviously went down. So, what was your experience buying these subject twos and what caused them to get into a bad situation? Because I know you've had your horror stories.
Well, okay. The reason this podcast came up is you posted something. I made some kind of comment like that looks like a good deal until it doesn't. And so it's important to know your buy box. What's your criteria? Like, what's your minimum? And everybody should have some of that, right? It's got to have at least 15% equity. And it's got to cash flow at least a couple $100. That's a good place to start. The mortgage that you're taking over, it's got to have like a max interest rate of, I don't know, 4%, let's say. It can't be an adjustable rate mortgage, or it has to be a class C or better type of property. So you don't want to go into the class D neighborhoods. So it's got to have some minimum criteria. And I think one of the best minimum criteria is it's got to have at least some equity in it, and it's got to cash flow at least something. Unless you're at this level where a lot of guys and friends that we have are like, you know what? I just want this for the write-offs. You'll take a bad deal, Greg, that other people shouldn't take because at the end of the day, after your write-offs, it makes sense for you. And you're going to hold this property for the long term. You're going to hold it for 20, 30 years. And so you can take the write-offs, the depreciation to offset your other income. So now at the end of the day, you don't have to pay any taxes. But for most people out there, they don't need those write-offs. They need cash now.
Yeah.
And these subject to deals that a lot of people are taking are not helping them at all. They're taking on way too much risk, and it's time to start saying, hey, wait a minute, time out. That deal makes sense to Pace. And again, I love Pace. I'm not knocking him at all. Like, I'm a member of the Sub 2 and the Gator community. I just got back from Squad Up, which was awesome, an amazing summit. But what works for Pace may not work for you, okay? What works for me may not work for you. You've got to understand what's your main goal. What's the purpose of taking on this deal? So I got into a lot of trouble doing these subject twos that I should never have done. Now, the market did crash. That's outside of my control. I couldn't have prevented that. But still, even if the market would not have crashed, I was not in these deals. Because here's the thing too, it's easy to become the motivated buyer, right? I have some clients that are motivated buyers right now. They want to do deals so bad and they're willing to take on this marginal deal. I'm like telling them, no, that's not a good deal for a lot of reasons. So you've got to make sure you have your buy box criteria and then make sure you do not become the motivated buyer that takes on a bad deal that you should have never done. Because the market's probably not going to crash in our lifetime like it did back in 2007 and 8. It might, but it probably won't. Let's be honest, okay? But this is what happened. I was motivated buyer. I just got to buy these things and I would buy them with a lot of leverage, a lot of debt. I was taking over loans that were adjustable rates. That was a bigger thing then than it is now. These loans were going to adjust and rates were going to go up, but I thought I'll sell it before then. So my strategy at the time was buy them subject to and sell them on a lease option. And some of them I was hoping to keep for a long term. The other thing, I was trying to buy them where I had at least 15% equity in each deal. So I was buying them at 85% loan to value. Problem was I was being too generous, not conservative enough on the value of the property. I was basing my valuations on the higher comps. I was not giving myself any room for error. So I was pushing the values up a little bit. So if it was worth maybe 185 to 200,000, I was basing all my numbers on the $200,000.
I see.
So think about it then. If the property maybe is worth more like 185, well, my 15% equity is really only like 5% or less.
Yeah, or you might just be in the thing for what you owe on it.
Yeah. So here's the thing. You can get a spreadsheet that can tell you anything you want it to tell you. And I'm a spreadsheet geek. These spreadsheets were telling me, hey, you'll make $200 a month cash flow. You get all these write-offs. And then when you sell the property, because you will sell it, that's what the spreadsheet says, you'll make $30,000 in 3 years. And, I'm covering for vacancies and maintenance and repairs and all of that because the spreadsheet says I should only have to pay 8% a month, but it doesn't tell you, okay, when the roof starts leaking and there's a bunch of water damage or something, or the tenant stops paying and they won't leave because you think that property's cash flowing $200 because that's what the spreadsheet tells you. Well, guess what? It doesn't cash flow $200. You may be taking that money and setting it aside, but one vacancy, and you're going to get them, will wipe out all those reserves like that. Now you got to go and fix that property up a little bit, put some money into it to clean it up. And if you're using a property management company, guess what they charge you? They charge you 1 month's rent as a fee. So there goes another month's rent. And so then you're going to have water heater to replace in 3 years, 5 years. You're going to have a roof to replace. You're going to have a leaky faucet. You're going to have a tenant who trashes the property. You're going to have a tenant who doesn't pay you for 3 months. Then you finally get them out. It takes another month to clean it up and get it ready. And it takes another month to get a new tenant in there. And then you have to pay another month's fee to that property management company to put a tenant in. So that vacancy, the spreadsheet said should only last 1 or 2 months, is really like 4 months.
Oh, yeah.
So listen, not if they go wrong, but when they go wrong. This is one of those risks. It's a calculated risk that you need to learn to manage. Now, I'm not saying like don't buy and hold properties because there's a lot of benefits and advantages to it. There's the write-offs, right? Which is the biggest thing in my opinion. The depreciation, the equity pay down. You've got a mortgage. The tenant is paying the mortgage for you and you're paying that off. So subject to really only makes sense if you're willing to hold it in the long term. That's my philosophy and opinion on it, right? If you're willing to hold it for the long term and you're not counting on that money today, you're not counting on that deal to sell in 3 or 4 years. Like, especially subject to deals, you need to have multiple exits and think worst case. What's going to happen if I can't find a tenant in 3 months for this property? What if the rehab takes 6 months instead of 3 months? What if the values go down? What if I can't rent it for $1,800? I can only rent it for $1,700 a month, right? What does that do to my numbers? What does the spreadsheet tell me then? And like, what if? And you need to be okay with different exit scenarios. If I can't sell it, can I rent it out? If I can't find a good lease option tenant buyer on it, can I just put a regular tenant in there? So here's the big thing that you got to understand. And this is true for every type of deal you do, not just subject to. I call it like under promise, over deliver. You got to do that to yourself. And that's true for business. But like, if you think a property is worth $275,000 to $300,000, that's what you think you can sell it for after you fix it up. And we're talking Midwest values here, right? If you think a property can sell for $900,000 to $1 million, then you should plan on selling it for like $895,000.
Yep.
Pick the lower number. If you think the rents are going to be $1,700 to $1,800 a month, go with $1,700 a month in rent. This was my biggest problem when I got into troubles with all these subject twos. I was overestimating and under-delivering. So never be so careful because when you look at the spreadsheets, they'll tell you whatever you want it to tell you. You've got to think worst case. You got to be more conservative on the ARV, on the repairs. And instead of doing 8% for vacancies and maintenance, do 15%. And any cash flow that you think you're getting, forget about it. There is no cash flow in rental properties, right?
Yeah.
There is none. It's going to disappear like that in your first vacancy, your first maintenance and repairs. And you just got to expect it and be okay with that. And if you are okay with that, then it's a good deal.
I couldn't agree more with what you said. I bought a property in New York, which is difficult to deal with tenants, to say the least. And the owner financed me, which is rare in New York. He basically became the hard money lender. That's the way it went down. Simple owner financing, 18-month note. I was going to close with the tenants in place, but the owner already served them notice to vacate. So I basically had to sit on it for a month, and then the tenants, in theory, should have left. Now, I buy the property. And the way that the attorney did the contract, they screwed up and it said that the property had to be vacant and the seller signed it. And then the seller was like, hey, like this contract says vacant. You gave me your word that you were buying it with the tenants. So I said, you know what? I'm going to keep my word. I close on this property. The tenant gets pissed off that he has to leave. And then the tenant goes to an attorney and the attorney's like, hey, you're in New York State. You can sit here for 6 months and you're good to go. So now I have to pay this tenant $6,000 to leave, which it is what it is. And this was a thinner deal. I mean, I'll probably make 40 on it at the end of the day. Like that was completely unexpected. I went off of my word and my word ended up biting me. And now I got to pay these people to leave when in theory I should have collected rent for the month of June, which I'm obviously not going to get now.
So the lesson learned is be prepared for the unexpected.
Yes.
Because the unexpected is going to happen.
It always happens. Once you get on the deed of a property, that's when you have the liability.
And another worst case is, what if the bank calls it due? In other words, what if the bank says, hey, you're not allowed to do this and you have 30 days? You got to be prepared for that. And it's not a big deal. There's things you can do for that. And I've had to do that. This happened to me and it also happened to one of my friends. I'm going to tell my friend's story. But
Okay.
basically, my friend told the bank, go ahead, foreclose on it. I'll give it back to you. And the bank was like, well, okay, never mind. Because they knew if they were to take it back, he was paying the mortgage on it and the bank didn't want to take it. So that often, most of the time happens. But
Yeah.
sometimes, like I was talking to a student, bought my lease options course and I was talking to him. It's like, hey man, where do you work? He said, City Mortgage. I said, you work for City Mortgage? He said, yeah. I said, wow, what division? He said, well, we work in the division that collects the payments from the customers. I said, oh, really? Do you know what subject twos are? And he said, yeah, everybody knows what subject twos are. I said, really? This is a guy who works in City Mortgage. I said, what's your opinion of subject twos? He goes, we know they go on, but we don't worry about it unless you force our hand. But if you start missing payments, we're going to worry about it. And if the insurance isn't done properly, we're going to worry about it. So number one is make sure the payments are being made. Number two, make sure the insurance is still good. Like the bank is listed as the mortgage holder, the lender, and make sure that the original owner who's still on the loan is listed as additional insured or the main insured or something like that, right? So you need to make sure you have an insurance company that's working with you and knows how to do these subject twos and it's insured properly. So you got to be super careful about that. There's just some simple basic things that you need to be prepared for and expect the worst can happen because it might. And are you going to be okay with that? For me, I wasn't prepared for any of that. I was 100% best case scenario in all my deals. And I did about 10 or 12 subject twos in a 1 or 2 year period. And this is what happened.
You stacked them. You did all this in a quick timeline. Like
It was
like,
easy because there were tons of motivated sellers out there. But I was doing this thing where I would borrow private money, and we're seeing a lot of people doing this right now.
Oh, yes.
In subject to deals. They're borrowing money from other investors. Okay, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But again, worst case scenario, what's going to happen if XYZ happens? If you're the guy lending the money, what's going to happen if it falls through? If you're the guy borrowing the money, what's going to happen if the values fall or you all of a sudden have a vacancy now and you can't make the mortgage payment? So think about this. You've got 15 subject twos. And I was in a situation where I was hemorrhaging money and I had all these mortgage payments that I had to pay. I also had my own mortgage payment to pay on my house that I was living in. If you miss a mortgage payment on a subject to, that dings that seller's credit, and they're going to get a 30-day late on their credit report, which is going to make it hard, if not impossible, to get a loan for a car, to buy another house. It's going to stay there for 3, 5, 7 years or something. So I was at this place where it was day 29 in a 30-day month, hour 23, minute 59, man, and I'm paying that mortgage payment at the last minute. And the seller's freaking out because they're getting tons of calls from the bank, automated calls like, hey, you're missing your mortgage payment, And now I'm paying all these late fees. I'm telling the seller, don't worry about it. I'm sorry. I'm going to make the mortgage payment. But I was making these mortgage payments on houses that were vacant.
Oh my God, Joe. Sounds like a nightmare.
Does that ever happen?
I mean, this has happened to me more often than I'd like to tell you with doing eviction stuff.
There's a reason why the best list to send direct mail to
Tired landlords. We buy houses from them all the time.
But now you've got a vacant property and you need to make that mortgage payment, or guess what? It affects that seller's credit. And they're freaking out and they're calling you saying, hey, what's going on? So I got into this situation, and it was my fault, where I was not making my own mortgage payment because I needed the cash to pay these sellers' mortgage payments. And I lost my own property to short sale and foreclosure because I had all these debts that I was responsible for. Then what happens is now you're desperate for cash and you're hemorrhaging money. So then you'll just take the next tenant that can fog a mirror into that property. You don't care about background check. If they've got $3,000 for a deposit and first month's rent, you'll take them. Now all of a sudden you've got a crappy tenant because you didn't take the time to filter them and pre-screen them out, right? And then that tenant stops paying the rent. Then it takes 3 months to get them out. And it's this vicious downward cycle. People forget about this stuff. People got into real estate in 2012. They've been doing this business now for 12 years. And they're like, man, everything I touch turns to gold. I'm going to become a coach. I'm going to teach people how to do real estate. And they've not seen the dark side of market cycles. But if you've been in this business for 10 years, you still don't know what some of us know 15 years ago when the market tanks. So I was in this situation now. I never missed a seller's mortgage payment on these subject twos. But the other problem I had two other problems. Number one, I had too much debt. I was over leveraged with other private investors. And number two, the tenant buyers weren't buying the properties like they were supposed to be buying because I was doing lease options. I buy it on a subject to, and then I would sell it on a lease option. Some of these deals, I had a lot of equity in them, but I was wanting to borrow some more money to do the rehab and to maybe pocket a little bit of my profit early. Okay, guys. Listen to this.
Borrow your profit early?
Never do this. Never.
Never.
This stupidest thing. And there's people teaching this to borrow some of your profits early. Because guess
Oh,
what? You don't have to pay taxes on it.
I see. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
That's the worst, and it gets me so mad. Because remember, we're talking about like you're hoping if everything goes great, but no, what you're doing is you're removing any margin for error. So what I was doing is I was borrowing private money. And at the time, I was doing it according to the book. I was using private money through title companies, and I was recording a mortgage and a deed of trust against the property. So I was protecting that private investor. But all of a sudden, that 15% equity went to zero, and then it went to negative equity. And these
Mhm.
private investors wanted their money back. They're like, hey, I want out of this deal. And I had promised them, because at the time it was easy to find private money, just give me 90-day notice and I'll replace your money. When values drop, who's going to lend me the money on a deal with zero equity in it or only 5%
Yeah.
equity in it? Nobody. So now I'm getting threatening letters from attorneys of my
Oh,
private investors saying, you said you would replace their money with a 90-day advance notice. Well, it hasn't happened yet. So guess what? If you don't pay my private investor, we're going to foreclose on the property. A private investor can foreclose on the property. And then what happens? The bank gets involved. The tenant buyer who's in the properties, they're going to get a lawyer. The seller is going to get a lawyer. And all of a sudden, you got everybody breathing on your back like, what's going on here? This is mortgage fraud. And all the red flags are going up. So it just spirals out of control. At the time, my assistant would lend me money on these deals to pay off these private investors so that I'd get them off my back. And now I've got the seller freaking out. It's like, what's going on? I got this letter from this attorney that you borrowed money on my property. They forgot that I had saved them from foreclosure 2 years ago, right? They
yeah.
forgot that I got their mortgage current because they were behind on 2 or 3 months. Now they're freaking out because, oh, I can't get a mortgage. Why not? Well, because when are you going to pay me off? When are you going to close my deal? I said, well, we still got, at the time, maybe 5 years, 10 years left on this mortgage. I'm taking it over. Well, I can't buy another house or I can't get this because this is still showing up on my credit. Well, yeah. Don't you remember that disclosure statement that you signed? Don't you remember when you signed the contract, it said this mortgage is going to stay in your name. So then they tell a friend or their brother and they said, you should talk to an attorney. Attorney looks into it and is like, what? You signed this? What were you thinking? So then get this. This is what happened to me once. I have these private lenders, these investors that want out of this deal, want their money back, and I have no equity, no cash to give it to them. So I do a subject to, and I tell the seller I had 5 years. I was going to buy it for subject to for 5 years and then cash them out because real estate always goes up, right? The property's worth 200 now. It'll be worth 250 in 5 years, guaranteed. It's not. It's not guaranteed. So 2 years into this, the seller calls me and I put a tenant buyer in the property. They have a 2-year lease option to buy the property or whatever. So I'm all in for maybe 200 and I'm going to sell it for 230. Lots of margin for error there. Well, maybe not. So this is what happens now. The seller calls me and says, hey, when are you going to cash me out and close this loan? Because I can't get another mortgage with this thing going on. I say, well, I can't buy it right now because I have a tenant buyer in the house who's going to be buying it. And then I get a call from the tenant buyer. Who's this at my door? The original seller went to the property, knocked on the door and said, hey, tenant buyer, my name's Jim. When are you going to buy this house? Tenant buyer says, who are you? And the seller says, well, I own this house. Wait, I thought Joe owned this house. No, I own it. When are you going to buy it? And then I get a call from the tenant buyer. Who is this guy? Oh, well, he technically owns it, but I actually own it. He's just the original owner. So tenant calls the lawyer, seller calls the lawyer, and then I get a letter saying mortgage fraud.
That's not mortgage fraud.
I did it all above the book. It's legit. Of course it is. I could show them the HUD statement where it says subject to right there. When you ask an attorney, they're going to look at this as mortgage fraud because in the contract, it says that you can't deed this property to somebody else without the bank's approval.
Sure.
All of the mortgages say that. It depends on kind of who you ask, right? Because technically by the letter of the law, you're not supposed to do it. But you can do it if the seller agrees to it. And we're fully open and honest, full disclosure, everything.
Yeah, they got to sign.
And I use attorneys, I use title companies to close my deals. So the attorneys, they read all of my disclosures. They read all of my contracts. I had them in an LLC. I had them in a trust. It was all fine. The problem was the attorney. They say, this guy took title to your property and kept the mortgage in your name. Why would you do that? Well, I was in a bad situation back then. I trusted the guy. That attorney's not going to know what's going on. Well, now all of a sudden I got threatening emails, letters, and phone calls from the seller, the tenant, their lawyers, and they're like, you need to fix this. This is worst case. Not every deal
is like Nightmare on Elm Street subject to deal.
But I'm not in a place to do it. I can't fix it because I'm hemorrhaging my own cash. I'm not even being able to pay my mortgage. I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul. So I was honest with the seller and I said, I'm in a really rough spot here. I cannot make next month's mortgage payment, okay? But I have a good tenant in there. That's paying the rent on time. So the next month, I'm going to have the tenant send you the rent instead of me. So I quit claimed deeded the property back to the original seller. And then that solved everything. And then I did a new lease between the tenant that was in the house.
And the original
And
owner.
when I was open and honest with them, it all kind of worked out at the end. But man, I was in a world of hurt and I was super stressed because now you got to remember when you do subject twos, you are on the hook for making those mortgage payments.
No matter what.
I'm telling you, now every private lender that I borrowed money from, I paid them all back. Some of them, it took me 7 or 8 years. I was just borrowing.
Like little filler money, like,
Yeah,
closing costs and kitchen update, nothing crazy.
closing costs to fix the property up and to borrow a little bit of profit early.
That's crazy.
Well, people do it all the time. They do cash out refinance. It's the Burr strategy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and do it. Borrow as much as you can. Refi till you die,
Oh,
baby.
I hear that. I don't agree with that at all. I like free and clear rentals. I got a few of them that are like at least 50% equity. I got another one in straight cash, and it makes me sleep better at night because there's nobody to pay except for the taxes.
Do not forget the worst case scenario. Hopefully you're protected. Weren't stupid like I was. I gave them a 90-day out. I told them in 90 days, you give me some notice and I'll give you your money back because it was easy to find new money to replace them with. And we're seeing a lot of this today. People are buying deals with zero equity, zero cash flow. And maybe that's okay if you are going to hold it for the long haul and you've got other income, but it's so tempting to borrow your profits early, to take a little bit out from a private second or something like that. You've got to make sure you have other sources of income and you got to have a rainy day fund.
Because that's going to keep you safe. And listen, when you're established, you got multiple income streams, you got a pretty decent balance sheet. But what you said, the biggest takeaway I got, that is what I do when I do buy a sub deal. I only buy sub two deals with equity, right? So I did a sub two, we actually flipped it. There was an $80,000 margin in there. So even if that property went to hell in a handbasket, I could have fire sold that thing and I would have made a little bit of money. So like the thin deals, that's where I see big problems. I see people trying to wholesale these deals too. Like they're trying to wholesale a sub two with no equity. And I think that can be a little fishy too. Reason being is like you're promising a seller one thing, you're the buyer, and then you go assign it to somebody you don't know from a hole in the wall. And that person could have a bad reputation. And now the seller thought you were buying it, you assign it. That smells like a lawsuit to me.
Here's the thing. You might say, well, they can't come after me. I don't own it anymore. Hogwash. Their attorney will sue anybody and everybody that was involved with that deal. They'll sue you. They'll sue your mom, your grandma, kids, your uncles and aunts and nieces and nephews. They'll sue you all. And it doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to convince them that it's okay to do subject to. I got to be clear again. There is a place for subject twos. It's a great strategy if you do it right. If you have a cushion, if you have the reserve. So if and when things go bad, you can make the mortgage payment. You need to be ready and prepared to say, oh, you know what? I'll take care of you, Mr. Seller. I gave you my word. I'll make the mortgage payment and I'll figure out what's going on. I'll take care of it. Are you in a place where you can do that?
If you're not, the takeaway for the people, and I say this a lot, people disagree with me. I'm like, listen, if you're brand new, you shouldn't mess around with subject to deals. You should be wholesaling houses, flipping land, creating income, and creating skills. Then once you start saving some money up and you have a balance sheet and some cash reserves, you can start playing around. Because listen, if you know the worst case is you might lose $30,000 on a subject to deal, but you have $150K sitting in cash in the bank, well, you still have 120 after you make that deal whole. If it goes south, and you're not going to lose sleep over it. When people get over levered, especially with seconds and gap funding, like that's when I see deals just go sour. Now in our business, we don't do that. Like if we're doing a sub two deal, any equity that's going to be contributed to that deal is coming from me and it's my money. And I'm going to only do the deal if it makes sense. And I'm going to run the worst case scenario. I'm going to look at it as a rental if I can't sell it. I have the means to pay it back if I absolutely had to. And I only do the sub two deal if that's the true best thing for the seller and it actually makes sense. And a lot of the times my acquisitions guy will say, this makes no sense to do. You should not sell us your house subject to. You should sell this with a realtor or sell it for cash or short sale it. But there are times where it does make sense with the sub two. So you just got to go in this with your eyes open and you got to take everything into account, not just think that you're picking up properties with none of your own money and they're all happen to be good deals because of the way you can acquire it.
The other thing is I want to say, when you start borrowing private money, bridge funding, other investors, private money, doesn't matter what kind of deal, you always got to make sure your private investor gets paid first.
Oh, yeah.
I'm telling you this because I went through this. You better be missing your own mortgage payment on your own personal residence before you don't pay one of your private investors back. Even if a deal goes bad, I'm communicating with that private investor and I'm letting them know, listen, I'm not going to take any money out of this deal until you get paid back all the money you invested with me. So when the profit comes out of a deal, your private investor gets paid first. And if there's anything left, that goes to you. That's how seriously you need to take this. And if you're not willing to do that, then go find another line of work. Do something else because you've got to make sure your private investors are being taken care of.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. And I see this a lot, unfortunately, Joe. It's like, well, the contract says the collateral is the house. Okay, sure. Like, not only are you ruining someone's financial situation, but you just burned a bridge and that's going to spread. Integrity is the number one thing. That's a principle.
Let's talk about some of you guys are already in these deals. You're
Sure.
thinking, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? Depends on the deal. Okay. Start setting aside a nest egg, a little savings account for vacancies. And I say this to everybody, start learning how to do wholesaling. Start
Oh, it's
learning
huge.
how to make fast cash. I can't tell you, when I figured this out, it was game over for me in a good way. Because when I needed money, I knew how to find deals. I just wholesale a deal, make a quick 10 grand, take care of that
There
problem.
you go. Take care
That's
of
a
that
good
problem.
skill to
Yeah.
have. Learning how to be a deal finder is the most important skill in this business, okay? So learn how to wholesale deals and don't get greedy. If you learn how to do this business, you can make a quick 5, 10 grand just like that and get yourself out of a lot of trouble. So start building up that nest egg to cover the worst case scenarios. And the other thing I'll say is start thinking now how to pay off, how to get out of debt. Leverage has a good place for things, right? But there is a point where it's too much. It's impossible to go into bankruptcy if you don't have any debt. There's a place for debt. Okay, I'm not saying that. But like, I tell you what, for me personally, I'd rather have 10 free and clear properties than 100 leveraged properties.
Oh, me too. 100%. Scott Jelinek is the master of that, our mutual friend.
Now, you can still use short-term leverage to buy these properties, but pay them off as soon as you can. I'm telling you, don't believe the lie that you should refi till you die.
No.
There's a
It's
tweetable tweet right there.
I've heard that before, and I spend a lot of time thinking about stuff I listen to and watch and read.
So start thinking about get rid of your bad deals as soon as possible. Get rid of those dogs, and we all have them. Sell it now. Better to take a $20,000 loss now than a $50,000 loss later. Trust me. Keep your good deals. Pay them off as soon as you can. Put any extra money you can to pay down that debt, to pay off the private investors. Save aside some money for future mortgage payments, unknown things that can happen. You will thank me later. And I guarantee you there's somebody listening to this right now who's thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to do what Joe said. And in 2 years from now, you're going to look back and say, that podcast saved my life. It
Percent.
saved my marriage. It saved my mortgage. Guys, I'm speaking from experience. Like I had way too many properties, way too much debt and leverage. I had a bunch of subject twos, owner financing. I did deals where I put the seller in second. So let me give you an example. $150,000 house. I put a private investor in first position for 20 grand and the seller in second position at 130 grand. Does that make
Wow.
sense? There's nothing wrong with that. I didn't break
Yeah.
any laws. I fully disclosed to the seller that she was going to be in second position on $120,000 second position on a house that was worth 150. My private investor, they're like, I'll loan you that money all day long. Cake, right? Now you're thinking, Joe, you're an idiot. I would never do that. But man, at the time, it was easy. The seller was motivated. She wanted to get rid of that house. But guess what? 2 years later, she's like, when am I going to get my money? I'm like, well, look at the contract. And then she did the same thing. She calls her attorney.
Oh,
Attorney
no.
looks at it and is like, whoa, wait a second. And now I didn't break any laws, but that attorney is like, what did you do? She's calling me. Now my private investor's like, what's going on? I got a letter. And so I'm telling you all the worst case scenarios, right? I've got a lot of deals where I've made a lot of money. I'm telling you the worst case scenarios. You put my grandma, my mom in second position on 120,000. And my private investor, if he wanted to, he could have foreclosed
And wiped her out.
and wiped her out. So here's the deal. Let me end it with this. I was doing a lot of subject twos, and my coach at the time said, Joe, think about this. If that seller were to ask an attorney, should they sign that contract? What do you think the attorney would say? Of course, an attorney is not going to tell their client to sell a property at 50, 60 cents on the dollar. And so that just got me thinking in a different way. None of us are in the business to take advantage of sellers, right? You got to do the right thing. Always do the right thing. If you do the right thing, you will always come out ahead. Do the right things for sellers. Do the right things for your private investors. Do the right things for your tenants. Do the right things for your buyers. And I promise you, it'll come back to you many times over, and you'll have a great business and you'll make a lot of money. Just do not get greedy, right?
100%, especially with the creative deals when you're taking over other people's mortgages, because we went through the whole laundry list of what could really go wrong, worst case scenario. Now, obviously, if people are listening, like that could happen. It has happened to Joe. But if you go in with the right principles and you have equity in these deals and you're not greedy and you're not borrowing your profits early and you're minimizing your chances. But just to summarize the show, if you're going to do rental property investing like Joe and I have done for a while, you're going to deal with the BS that happens and you got to think long term, right? You can't be thinking in the next 12 months because, tenants are transient and stuff breaks in houses. I had a rent property that I just did a full rehab on and I was cash flowing 1,000 a month until I just put 28 grand of cash into it. There's 2 years worth of cash flow gone. So go in this with your eyes
Happens.
open.
You gotta have thick
Yeah,
skin in this
you got to
business.
have
It's
thick
not
skin.
for everybody. This isn't a hobby, guys. This is a
No, it's a
business.
tough
You're dealing with
business.
people's lives. You're dealing with their life savings, their retirement money. You've got to take this seriously. And we're not in it to make a quick buck. We're in it to
No.
make a long buck. We're in this for the long haul. We want to be in business for a long time. Your reputation is more important than the money that you're making. Now, again, I want to be super clear. I'm not bashing subject to, right? I'll still do a subject to today on the right deal. Subject twos are great for short-term rehabs. You've got to put on the brakes a little bit, in my opinion, on the subject twos with no equity and no cash flow.
100%.
I just don't see that unless you're somebody making $1 million a year and you're okay with losing money because that means you can write off and
Nice.
you're okay with holding that property for 30 years because you can depreciate it and you've got 100 grand in the bank to cover any vacancies and repairs and maintenance. And you're going to take care of that property for the long haul because then the numbers make sense and you're writing off these losses that are going to help you make more money in the long run when it comes to the taxes and stuff like that.
Exactly.
But if you're in this for just a quick buck, very careful with subject twos.
And that's where I see wholesaling. You got to get good at finding those deals. That's the key to getting yourself out of jams, having cash come in, being able to have the skills to generate that income. And Joe, I know you've been teaching the business, you've been doing the business for a very long time. You got a lot of great information out there. So as we wind the show down, what is the best way for people to check you out and listen to more of your material? Because it's fantastic. I listen to your stuff all the time. I've been doing that
Thanks,
for
man.
years now.
YouTube. Go to YouTube, do a search for Joe McCall, and I put out content a lot there. I do 3-4 videos a week, and I'm just always trying to teach good value and deliver stuff, and I think you'll like it.
Well, Joe, we'll make sure we have that in the show notes. And I appreciate you being a guest on today's show, my friend.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Good talking to you, man.